Alright, so we are now on 6.4, completing the square. Alright, perfect square trinomials. A perfect square trinomial is a trinomial that is equal to the square of a binomial. To see why they are what they are, use FOIL on the following binomial squares. X minus 3 squared, well, that's the same thing as x minus 3 times x minus 3. You FOIL that out, you get x squared minus 6x plus 9. Alright, so that binomial square has a perfect square trinomial that goes with it. 2n plus 3 squared, alright, that's a perfect binomial squared if you FOIL it. You then get 4n squared plus 12n plus 9. Perfect square trinomial. Alright, again in reverse, if you factor the perfect square trinomial, you get that binomial squared. If you just looked at a plus b squared, a plus b times a plus b, FOIL it, you get a squared plus 2ab plus b squared. So there's a pattern for perfect square trinomials. The outside terms are perfect squares, and the middle term is twice the product of the two terms. Completing the square is a process that helps us solve quadratic equations, whether or not the expression can be factored. Right, so far we've factored to find the roots of the quadratic, we've graphed to find the roots of the quadratic, we've done the quadratic formula, now we're doing completing the square. Completing the square is another way to do it when you can't just factor the equation. So notice the relationship between the middle term and the last term of the following. If you FOILed x plus 7 squared, it would give you x squared plus 14x plus 49. Alright, well 7 times 2 gives you 14, the middle number. 7 squared gives you 49, the third number. This relationship helps establish the process for completing the square. If a quadratic expression is the form x squared plus bx, you can find out what c is. Step 1, you need to find half of b, the coefficient of x. So in this case, you divide 16 by 2. 16 by 2 gives you 8. Next, you want to square the result of step 1, so you're going to square 8. 8 squared gives you 64. Step 3, add the result of step 2 to x squared plus bx. So you add 64 to the end, you get x squared plus 16x plus 64, a perfect square trinomial. This is part of the whole process of completing the square. This next section, it wants you to find the value of c that makes each trinomial a perfect square, and then write that trinomial as a perfect square. So number 1, looking back, first time through, looking at the notes. Alright, you can add those into your notes. Alright, when you're finding the perfect square, a little shortcut that you can take is when you divide b by 2. In the previous example, when we divided 16 by 2, that gave us 8. Well, that number, that 8, is what's going to go into our perfect square. It works every time, a little shortcut that you can do, a little helpful hint. Alright, so if you look at number 1, negative 10, you're going to divide it by 2, which gives you negative 5. When you square negative 5, that gives you 25, which is c. Well, it's also asking you to find the perfect square. Alright, well, the perfect square binomial, all you'll do is take that negative 5, alright, and plug it in. So you have x minus 5 squared. Alright, if that had been a positive 5, it would have been x plus 5 squared. But since it's negative, you get x minus 5 squared. Number 2, You're going to take 60 divided by 2. That gives you 30. Well, you square 30. That gives you 900. So C is 900. Well, the perfect square binomial that it's equal to, that perfect square trinomial is equal to a perfect square. Well, when you divided 60 by 2, that gave you 30. So that's what the perfect square is, x plus 30 squared. Number 3, we have fractions. Take negative 3, divide it by 2. All right, well, that just gives you negative 3 halves. Well, our next step, we square it. That gives you negative 3 squared is 9, 2 squared is 4, so C is 9/4. Same rules apply. To get our perfect square, you just take negative 3 when you divided it by 2, which gives you negative 3 halves, and you plug that into the binomial. So it'll be x minus 3 halves squared. All right, don't worry about those next problems. I'm going to jump to number 5. Again, we'll have a fraction. Well, remember, when you divide a fraction, all right, it's the same thing as multiplying by the reciprocal. All right, so 1/2 divided by 2 is the same thing as 1/2 times 2. All right, that gives you 2/2, which gives you 1. All right, so 1 squared equals 1. So x plus 1 squared. Oop, too fast. So you get C is 1, binomial is x plus 1 squared. Just joking with you there. Wanted to try and catch you and trick you. Actually, when you divide a fraction by 2, hopefully you caught this correction. When you divide a fraction by 2, it's the same thing as multiplying it by 1/2, which would give you 1/4. Alright, so 1/2 divided by 2 gives you 1/4. You square it, and you would get C equals 1/16. The binomial it would equal would be x plus 1/4. X plus 1/4 squared. Sorry, my brain got ahead of my hand. Alright, good work so far. Don't worry about those other problems. Alright, now we're going to complete the process of completing the square. Step 1, you need to get x squared plus bx on one side. Step 2, you'll complete the square. Make sure you add to both sides. Step 3, make the squared binomial or simplify it. Step 4, take the square root of both sides. Step 5, get the variable by itself. So looking at this example problem to the left, the first step will be to add 4 to the right side so that we can get x squared plus bx on one side. That'll leave you with n squared plus 8n box equals 4 box. Alright, you'll see why I put the boxes there, but it's a little trick to help you remember to do a step. Well, our next step, we'll take 8 and divide it by 2, which gives us 4. Well, then I'll square 4, and I'll put plus 16 in each box. That's why those boxes are there, to remind you to add to both sides. Alright, from there, I'll make that perfect square trinomial the binomial squared it's equal to, which would be n plus 4 squared, which equals 4 plus 16 is 20. Alright, remember the n plus 4, I took that 4 from dividing b by 2. From here, I will take the square root of both sides to solve for n. That gives me n plus 4 equals plus or minus 2 square root 5. When I simplify square root of 20, that gives you 2 square root 5. And remember, whenever you take the square root of a number, that gives you plus or minus that number. From here, I'll subtract 4, and I'll get n equals -4 plus or minus 2 square root 5. Remember, that is two solutions. That's two roots of the quadratic, but you can leave it in that form. That's completely fine. You'll also have complex solutions with I, imaginary solutions. All right. So, on those, we still follow the same process. First step, subtract 11. Gives me x squared plus 4x box equals -11 box. I'll then take 4, divide it by 2, which gives me 2. I then square 2, that gives me 4. I need to add 4 into both boxes. Alright, well now I have a perfect square trinomial, x squared plus 4x plus 4. The binomial squared it's equal to will be x plus 2 squared equals -11 plus 4 is -7. From this point, to solve for x, I need to take the square root of both sides. That will give me x plus 2 equals plus or minus I square root of 7. Remember, you need to take out the I when you have the square root of a negative number. I'll then subtract 2, and I get x equals -2 plus or minus I square root of 7. Alright, the next example with coefficients and fractions, well, to get a perfect square trinomial, a has to be 1. Well, in this case, a is 3. So, I need to divide the whole thing by 3, which that gives me a squared minus 2/3 a minus 1 equals 0. Okay. From there, I'll add 1/3, so I'll get a squared minus 2/3 a box equals 1/3. I will then do the same process, take -2/3 and divide it by 2. Remember, when you divide a fraction by a number, you multiply by the reciprocal, which in this case would give you -2/6, which is -1/3. I'll then square it, and so I'll get plus 1/9 in each box. Well, a squared minus 2/3 a plus 1/9 is a perfect square trinomial, even though it has fractions. Alright, from here, I'll convert it to the binomial squared. It equals, and so, this case, it will be a minus 1/3 squared equals, well, 1/3 plus 1/9 gives you 4/9. From here, I will take the square root of both sides, which gives me a minus 1/3 equals plus or minus 2/3. Add 1/3, and I will get 1/3 plus or minus 2/3, which then gives me that a will equal 1, and a will be also equal -1/3. Those are my two roots of the quadratic. Remember, you need to do 1/3 plus 2/3, and you need to do 1/3 minus 2/3. Okay? Alright, those are a little different, but just remember to do completing the square, a has to be 1. So you're just going to divide the whole thing by whatever a is. In this case, a was 3, so we divided the whole thing by 3. Alright, solve each equation by completing the square. I'm going to do some examples for you. First, I will add 5, which will give me y squared minus 4y box equals 5 box. Take -4, divide it by 2, which gives me -2. I then square it, which gives me 4. I put the 4 in the boxes. So I'll now have y minus 2 squared equals 9. From there, I'll take the square root of each side, which gives me y minus 2 equals plus or minus 3. Add 2 to each side. Y equals 2 plus or minus 3. So my answer will be 5 and negative 1. 2 plus 3 is 5. 2 minus 3 is negative 1. Number 9, I will subtract 21. I get s squared minus 10s box equals negative 21 box. I'll then do negative 10 divided by 2, which gives me negative 5. Negative 5 squared gives me 25. Alright, I'll simplify that to s minus 5 squared equals 4. Then take the square root of both sides. S minus 5 equals plus or minus 2. Add 5. I get s equals 5 plus or minus 2. So my answer will be 7 and 3. Next problem, number 10, a is 2. So I can't do completing the square unless I divide the whole thing by 2. That'd give me x squared minus 3 halves x plus 1 half equals 0. Subtract 1 half, and I'll get x squared minus 3 halves x box equals negative 1 half box. Divide negative 3 halves by 2, and that gives me negative 3 fourths. I square that, and I get plus 9 sixteenths plus 9 sixteenths. When I simplify that, I'll get x minus 3 fourths squared equals 1 over 16. Take the square root of both sides. That leaves me with x minus 3 fourths equals plus or minus 1 fourth. Add 3 fourths, and I get x equals 3 fourths plus or minus 1 fourth. Well, that gives me an answer of 1 and 1 half. Alright, I want you to go ahead and do problems 13, 14, and 15 on this page. Okay? I will be checking this when I get back. You will turn it in to me. Alright, the next worksheet that you get is a little different at the very beginning. Alright, it's not very difficult, but it is a little different. Problem number 1, I will have x squared minus 8x plus 16 equals 1. Well, x squared minus 8x plus 16 is a perfect square trinomial. So to figure out the binomial squared it's equal to, all you have to do is divide negative 8 by 2. You get negative 4. So the binomial squared it's equal to will be x minus 4 squared equals 1. Well, from here, we solve. Take a square root, x minus 4 equals plus or minus 1. Add 4 plus or minus 1. We get an answer of 5 and 3. 4 plus 1 is 5, 4 minus 1 is 3. This is the square root property. Number 3, we take 12 divided by 2. Gives us 6. Well, x squared plus 12x plus 36 is a perfect square trinomial. The binomial squared it's equal to is x plus 6 squared equals then 25. So again, from here to solve, square root, and we get x plus 6 equals plus or minus 5. Subtract 6, and we get x equals negative 6 plus or minus 5. So the two roots of our quadratic are negative 1 and negative 11. All right, if you graphed that, it would cross the x-axis at negative 1 and negative 11. Just continue to do that throughout these problems. All you got to do is divide b by 2, and that gives you your binomial squared it's equal to, then just square both sides. Next section, we already did a section like this in our notes. Alright, all you do here, take 10 divided by 2, gives you 5, square it, and you get 25. So c equals 25. Then the binomial square, the perfect square binomial it's equal to, was 10 divided by 2 gave you 5, so it would be, in this case, x plus 5 squared. Alright, I want you to finish both sides of this worksheet, front and back, every problem. You have plenty of time to do this. You have at least an hour to do this. I will be taking it up Wednesday and Thursday for a grade, a completion grade, and I need to see your work. I don't want to just see answers. If you need to do the work on a separate sheet of paper, then do it on a separate sheet of paper. All right, do it out, make it all pretty, so I can tell you just didn't grab someone's homework and just write the answers down. The more I see of that when I take it up, the lower your grade will drop. This is a 20-point grade, okay? Could be a super easy 20-point grade. I just want to see effort and work, okay? All right, sounds good. Thank you.